The New Mexico desert stretched endlessly before Luke Carter, a tapestry of cracked earth and withered sagebrush that spoke of months without rain. The late afternoon sun hung low and angry in the sky, painting everything in shades of burnt orange and dusty brown. Heat waves shimmered off the barren ground, creating mirages that danced and disappeared like ghosts of the water that once flowed through these lands. Luke adjusted his worn hat and wiped the sweat from his brow with a sleeve that had seen better days. His boots, held together more by stubbornness than leather, kicked up small clouds of dust with each weary step. Beside him, his mare, Buttercup, the last remnant of what had once been a modest but thriving ranch, plodded along with her head low, conserving energy in the oppressive heat. The drought had taken everything. First the grass, then the cattle, and finally his dreams of building something lasting in this unforgiving land. Now, at 28, Luke was little more than a drifter, his pockets as empty as the canteen that hung from his saddle. He'd heard rumors of work at the mining camps near Silver City, and with no other options. He'd set out 3 days ago with nothing but hope and determination. The wind picked up suddenly, carrying with it the scent of sage and something else, gun smoke. Luke's hand instinctively moved to the old Colt .45 at his hip, a gift from his father before consumption took him. He'd learned long ago that in this territory, the difference between living and dying often came down to recognizing trouble before it found you. The sound came next, sharp cracks echoing off the canyon walls ahead, followed by shouting, not English, but Apache. Luke had picked up enough of the language during his years ranching near the reservation to recognize the tone, desperate, angry. Female voices. He tied Buttercup to a stunted juniper and crept forward, using the scattered boulders as cover. The trail ahead wound through a narrow passage between two red rock formations, the kind of place his father would have called ambush country. As he peered around a sandstone outcropping, the scene below made his blood run cold. 3 Apache women stood with their backs against the canyon wall, facing 5 men who looked like they'd crawled out from under the devil's own rock. The women were tall, taller than most men Luke knew, and despite their defensive position, they held themselves with a fierce dignity that spoke of warrior blood. Their traditional dress was torn and dusty, and one had blood seeping through a gash in her upper arm. The bandits were a sorry lot, leather-faced men with cruel eyes and yellowed teeth, the kind who preyed on anyone weaker than themselves. Their leader, a massive brute with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, gestured with his rifle. "Come on now, ladies," he drawled in broken Apache mixed with English. "We ain't gonna hurt you much. Just want to have us some fun before we take you down to Mexico. Good money for Apache women down there, especially ones as tall and pretty as you." The center woman, her face proud despite the circumstances, spat at his feet and replied in rapid Apache. Luke didn't catch all of it, but the meaning was clear enough. She'd die before letting them touch her or her companions. The scarred man's face darkened. "Have it your way, then?" He raised his rifle. Luke didn't remember making the decision to act. One moment he was crouched behind the rock. The next he was sliding down the loose shale of the canyon side, his Colt already clearing leather. His first shot took the scarred man in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second caught another bandit in the leg before they even realized they were under attack. "Behind you!" Luke shouted to the women as he dove behind a fallen log, bullets whining overhead. Chaos erupted in the narrow canyon. The bandits, caught off guard, scrambled for cover while trying to determine where the attack was coming from. Luke had chosen his position well. The setting sun was at his back, blinding anyone who tried to look directly at him. One of the bandits made the mistake of breaking cover, trying to flank Luke's position. The Apache women, far from being helpless victims, seized the opportunity. The one with the wounded arm grabbed a rock and brought it down on his head with devastating force. He crumpled like a sack of grain. Luke kept up steady fire, making each shot count. He'd learned to shoot from his uncle, a former cavalry sergeant who drilled into him that in a real fight, accuracy mattered more than volume. A bullet splintered the wood inches from his face, showering him with fragments. He felt warm blood trickle down his cheek, but ignored it. The scarred leader, clutching his wounded shoulder, screamed orders at his remaining men. Two of them rushed Luke's position simultaneously. A desperate gamble. Luke dropped one with a shot to the chest, but the other was on him before he could swing his gun around. They went down in a tangle of limbs, rolling in the dust and sharp rocks. The bandit was smaller, but desperate, clawing at Luke's face while trying to wrestle the gun away. Luke drove his knee into the man's stomach, buying enough space to bring his elbow down hard on the bridge of his nose. The bandit went limp. When Luke struggled to his feet, covered in dust and blood, not all of it his own, the canyon had gone quiet except for the moaning of wounded men. The scarred leader and one other bandit had fled, leaving their companions behind. The three Apache women stood among the unconscious and wounded attackers, breathing hard but victorious. For a long moment, they all just stared at each other. Luke holstered his Colt with a shaking hand, adrenaline making his whole body tremble. The women exchanged quick words in Apache, their voices low and urgent. Finally, the one who'd spoken to the bandits, clearly their leader, stepped forward. "You are white," she said in accented but clear English, her dark eyes studying him with a mixture of suspicion and something that might have been gratitude. "Why do you help us?" Luke touched his hat brim in an automatic gesture of respect. "Ma'am, where I come from, a man doesn't stand by while women are threatened, don't matter what color they are." She considered this, her companions flanking her protectively. Up close, Luke could see they were all striking women, their height and bearing making them seem almost mythical in the fading light. But their eyes held a weariness that spoke of loss and hardship beyond what most could endure. "I am called Mary," the leader said finally, though Luke could tell it wasn't her real name, probably something given to her by missionaries or soldiers. "These are my sisters, not by blood, but by sorrow, Sarah." She gestured to the woman with the wounded arm. "And Ruth." The third woman, who hadn't spoken, watched Luke with eyes that seemed to see through him. "Luke Carter," he replied. "That cut needs tending," he added, nodding toward Sarah's arm. Mary glanced at the wound, then back at Luke. "Our village is 2 days' walk. The path is dangerous, especially now. These were not the only bad men in these hills." Luke looked at the unconscious bandits, then at the women, and finally at the darkening sky where storm clouds were beginning to gather. He thought of Buttercup, waiting patiently above, and the job supposedly waiting in Silver City. Then he looked again at the three women, standing tall despite everything they'd endured, and knew his decision was already made. "My horse can carry your supplies, and anyone who's hurt too bad to walk," he heard himself saying. "I'll see you safely home." Mary translated for her companions. Sarah said something sharp in Apache, gesturing at Luke with obvious distrust. Ruth remained silent, her gaze never leaving his face. A heated discussion followed, with Mary apparently arguing in Luke's favor. Finally, Mary turned back to him. "Sarah says you will demand payment when we reach our village, that all white men want something." Luke met her gaze steadily. "Your friend's wrong. I got nothing left to my name but that horse and this gun. Can't take something from people who've already lost enough. Just let me help get you home safe. Then I'll be on my way." Mary studied him for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "We accept. But know this, if you prove false, if this is a trick..." She didn't need to finish the threat. Luke had heard enough about Apache justice to understand. As they prepared to leave, gathering what supplies the bandits had left behind, Luke tore strips from his only spare shirt to bandage Sarah's arm. She submitted to his ministrations with ill grace, muttering in Apache the whole time. Ruth helped, her movements efficient and practiced, suggesting she'd dealt with wounds before. The storm clouds were rolling in faster now, bringing the scent of rain that would likely never fall. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the landscape in brief, stark moments. as they climbed back up to where Buttercup waited. Luke caught sight of their faces in one of those flashes. 3 women who'd lost their husbands to violence, carrying their grief with the same dignity they'd shown facing the bandits. "Thank you," Mary said quietly as they set off into the gathering darkness. It was the last thing any of them would say for many miles, but Luke felt the weight of those words. In saving them, something in his own empty life had shifted. He didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time since losing everything, he felt he was moving towards something instead of just away. The desert stretched out before them, vast and unforgiving, but no longer empty. Somewhere out there was their destination, and whatever fate awaited him there. Luke adjusted his hat against the rising wind and led the way into the storm. 3 tall shadows following in his wake. The red rock formations rose around them like ancient sentinels as they made their way through the winding canyon paths. Luke led Buttercup carefully, the mare picking her way through loose stones while carrying their meager supplies, and Sarah, whose wounded arm had begun to stiffen. The women moved with surprising grace despite their exhaustion, their knowledge of the terrain evident in every step. As night fell completely, they were forced to make camp in a shallow cave carved by wind and time into the canyon wall. Luke gathered dry brush for a small fire while the women spoke quietly among themselves. The firelight danced across their faces, highlighting the sharp cheekbones and proud features that marked them as Apache. "You know our land well for a white man," Mary observed as Luke returned with an armload of wood. "Ranched near Fort Stanton for 8 years," Luke replied, feeding sticks to the flame. "Learned to read the country or starve. The Apache taught me as much as anyone, tracking, finding water, which plants would kill you and which would keep you alive." Sarah snorted derisively and said something in Apache. Mary's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "She says no white man truly knows this land. You only borrow it until it takes you back." Luke nodded slowly. "She's not wrong. The drought proved that clear enough." He stared into the fire, remembering the day he'd had to shoot his last 3 steers rather than watch them die slowly of thirst. Land doesn't care about a man's plans or dreams. It just is. Ruth, who had been silent since their meeting, suddenly spoke. Her voice was soft, almost musical, but carried an underlying steel. "Your cattle died. Our husbands died. Which loss weighs more?" It wasn't an accusation exactly, but a test. Luke considered his answer carefully. "Can't say I know that kind of loss. Ma'am, losing property hurts a man's pride and pocket. Losing people—" He paused, thinking of his father's labored breathing in those final days. His mother's empty chair by the fireplace. "That cuts out pieces of your soul you never get back." Ruth studied him for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly before returning her attention to the fire. They shared what little food they had, strips of dried meat, some cornmeal, and water from Luke's canteen. The storm that had threatened earlier swept past to the north, leaving only distant thunder and the smell of rain on desert wind. Coyotes called to each other in the darkness, their yipping cries echoing off the canyon walls. "Your husband," Luke ventured carefully, looking at Mary. "Was he a warrior?" Mary's face hardened, but she answered, "They were all warriors. My James." She used the English name with visible discomfort. "He rode with the cavalry scouts, said working with the soldiers would protect our people, help us keep our land." Her laugh was bitter. "He was tracking raiders near the border when a patrol mistook his group for hostiles. They shot first, asked questions when it was too late." Luke winced. He'd heard similar stories. Good men dead because of fear and misunderstanding. "I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring him back." Mary poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "But you asked, so I tell you. Sarah's man died defending our winter camp from soldiers who said we were hiding renegades. We were hiding nothing but our children and old ones." Sarah must have understood some English, because she lifted her head and spoke rapidly in Apache, her good arm gesturing emphatically. Mary translated. "She says her William fought like 10 men, killed 4 before they brought him down. She carved each of their faces into her memory." The casual mention of violence made Luke shift uncomfortably, but he understood. On the frontier, vengeance was often the only justice available. "And Ruth?" he asked gently. Ruth looked up at the mention of her name. When she spoke, it was in English, heavily accented but clear. "Sickness," she said simply. "The spotted disease that comes with white traders. He was strong, but—" She touched her face, and in the firelight Luke could see the faint pockmarked scars. "I lived. He did not. Sometimes I wonder which of us was fortunate." They lapsed into silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Luke found himself studying the women when he thought they weren't looking. Despite their grief and the hard life written in every line of their faces, there was something compelling about them. Mary's natural leadership, Sarah's fierce spirit despite her wound, Ruth's quiet strength. They were nothing like the frontier women he'd known, yet everything like them in their resilience. The next morning brought new challenges. The path Mary chose led them higher into the hills, through stands of pinon pine and juniper that provided blessed shade, but also countless places for ambush. Luke kept his hand near his gun, eyes constantly scanning for movement. It was Ruth who spotted the tracks first, unshod ponies, at least 6, crossing their path from the east, fresh, probably from that morning. She knelt beside the prints, studying them with an expertise that surprised Luke. "Apache," she said quietly. "But not our band. These are running. See how deep the prints? Being chased or chasing something." Mary and Sarah examined the tracks, their expressions growing worried. They conferred in rapid Apache before Mary turned to Luke. "These are renegades, young men who wouldn't accept the reservation boundaries. If they find us with you—" She didn't need to finish. A white man traveling with Apache women would be seen as either a captive or worse. The renegades wouldn't ask questions before acting. "Is there another path?" Luke asked. "Yes, but it adds a day, through Skeleton Canyon." Mary's expression suggested this wasn't a preferable option. "Bad place. The rocks there hold old blood, old anger." Luke weighed their options. Speed versus safety. Known danger versus potential danger. "Your call," he said finally. "You know this country and these people better than I ever will." Mary seemed surprised by his deference. Most white men, in her experience, insisted on taking charge regardless of their ignorance. After a moment's consideration, she decided, "We go through Skeleton Canyon. Better to face ghosts than men with guns and no mercy." The detour took them into increasingly rough terrain. The canyon lived up to its name, bleached bones of cattle and horses scattered among the rocks, victims of flash floods or failed attempts to navigate the treacherous paths. The walls pressed close, sometimes forcing them to walk single file with Buttercup's sides brushing the stone. It was in the narrowest part of the canyon that disaster struck. A desert sandstorm, sudden and violent, swept down on them with almost no warning. One moment the air was still. The next, a wall of sand and debris hit them with the force of a runaway train. Luke grabbed Buttercup's reins with one hand and reached for the nearest person with the other, Ruth, as it happened. He pulled both toward the minimal shelter of an overhang as the world disappeared in a brown, howling chaos. Sand filled his nose, mouth, and eyes despite his attempts to shield his face. The wind shrieked like a living thing, tearing at their clothes and skin. He felt rather than saw Mary and Sarah press close, all of them huddled together as the storm raged. Ruth's hand gripped his arm with surprising strength, and he could feel her trembling, not with fear, he realized, but with the effort of holding back memories. The storm was bringing something back to her. Minutes stretched like hours. Luke kept his eyes closed, one arm around Buttercup's neck to keep her calm. The other somehow ended up around Ruth's shoulders as she curled into his chest. He could hear Mary speaking, prayers or curses. He couldn't tell which, and Sarah's labored breathing as sand invaded her wounded arm's bandages. When the storm finally passed, they emerged looking like dust-covered ghosts. Luke's water was now worth more than gold, and he parceled it out carefully, first to the women, then Buttercup, taking only enough himself to clear the grit from his throat. "Thank you," Ruth said quietly as they prepared to move on. Her dark eyes met his briefly before sliding away. "The storm, it reminded me—" "No need to explain," Luke said gently. "We all got things that take us back to places we'd rather not go." As they resumed their journey, Luke noticed a subtle shift in the women's behavior toward him. The suspicious glances became fewer. The distance they kept less rigid. When they stopped to rest in the shade of a large boulder, Sarah even allowed him to check her wound without protest. The day wore on, hot and exhausting. They climbed out of Skeleton Canyon as the sun reached its zenith, emerging onto a plateau dotted with ancient petroglyphs. Mary traced one with her finger, a spiral that seemed to pulse in the bright light. "Old signs," she explained. "From the people who came before. They say this mark means the journey changes you. Wise words from dead voices." Luke studied the ancient art, thinking how true those words had already proven. 2 days ago, he'd been just another failed rancher drifting toward an uncertain future. Now he wasn't sure what he was becoming, only that these 3 women had awakened something in him he'd thought the drought had killed along with his cattle. That evening, as they made camp on a ridge overlooking a vast expanse of mesa and mountain, Luke found himself sharing more than he'd intended. Maybe it was the way the setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and crimson. Or maybe it was the way the women listened without judgment. He told them about his father's dream of building a cattle empire, how he'd come west from Missouri with nothing but ambition and stubbornness, how Luke had inherited that dream along with the land, only to watch it turn to dust. He spoke of neighbors who'd given up and gone back east, of the girl in town who'd married a merchant rather than wait for a rancher with no prospects. "You could have gone east too," Mary observed. "Why stay?" Luke gestured at the landscape spread before them, harsh and beautiful in equal measure. "Because this is where I belong, I suppose. Win or lose, live or die. Something about this land gets into a man's bones. Can't explain it better than that." "No need," Mary said quietly. "We understand. The land claims who it will." As darkness fell and the stars emerged in all their desert brilliance, Luke realized he was no longer thinking about the job in Silver City. These 3 women, with their grief and strength, their beauty and sadness, had shifted his path as surely as the storm had shifted the sand. He didn't know where this trail would lead, but for the first time in months, he was eager to find out. The coyotes sang again in the darkness, their wild music echoing across the canyons. Somewhere ahead lay their destination, an Apache village where he would be a stranger, possibly unwelcome, certainly out of place. But as he watched the firelight flicker across 3 faces that had become unexpectedly important to him, Luke thought perhaps being out of place was just another way of finding where you truly belonged. The Apache village appeared at sunset, nestled in a valley between towering mesas that glowed like burnished copper in the dying light. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and the sound of children's laughter drifted on the evening breeze, a sound so normal, so peaceful, that it made Luke's chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. Their approach did not go unnoticed. Long before they reached the outer dwellings, riders appeared on the ridgelines, watching. Luke kept his hands visible and away from his weapons, acutely aware that one wrong move could end very badly. Mary called out in Apache, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. The riders remained motionless for a long moment before one separated from the group and rode down to meet them. He was young, perhaps 20, with the kind of fierce pride that reminded Luke of half-broken stallions. The conversation that followed was rapid and heated. The young warrior, Mary, called him Joseph, though Luke doubted that was his Apache name, kept gesturing at Luke with obvious hostility. Sarah and Ruth added their voices to Mary's, and gradually the tension eased, though Joseph's expression remained suspicious. "He will take us to the village," Mary explained to Luke, "but you must not speak unless spoken to, and keep your eyes down. Some will see direct gaze as challenge." Luke nodded, understanding the precarious nature of his position. As they entered the village proper, he became acutely aware of the attention they were drawing. Women paused in their work to stare. Children pecked out from behind their mothers' skirts. And men emerged from lodges with hands resting meaningfully on weapons. The village was larger than Luke had expected, a mix of traditional wickiups and more permanent adobe structures that spoke of a people caught between old ways and new realities. Dogs barked at their approach, and somewhere a baby cried, the sound so universal it could have been any frontier town. They were led to the center of the village, where a large fire pit was surrounded by logs worn smooth by countless councils. The crowd that gathered was substantial, perhaps 100 souls, all watching with expressions that ranged from curious to openly hostile. Then he appeared. Chief Marcus, for that was the name the Apache leader had taken in his dealings with whites, emerged from the largest dwelling with the measured pace of a man who had never needed to hurry in his life. He was not a large man, but he carried himself with such presence that he seemed to fill the space around him. His face was a map of years and wisdom, with eyes that missed nothing. He wore a mixture of traditional and modern dress, deerskin leggings and a cotton shirt, with a silver gorget at his throat that caught the firelight. His hair, still mostly black despite his years, was bound with strips of red cloth. When he moved, Luke noticed the slight favor of his left leg, an old wound, perhaps from battles fought before Luke was even born. The chief surveyed the scene before him, his 3 widowed tribeswomen, travel-worn and dusty, and the white man who had brought them home. His expression revealed nothing as he listened to Mary's accounting of their rescue. The crowd murmured at various points in the story, anger rising when she described the bandits' intentions, surprise when she told of Luke's intervention. When Mary finished, silence fell over the gathering. Chief Marcus walked slowly around Luke, studying him from every angle like a horse trader evaluating stock. Luke kept his eyes on the ground, feeling the weight of 100 stares. Finally, the chief spoke. His English was accented but clear, each word carefully chosen. "You killed white men for Apache women. I stopped men from doing evil," Luke replied carefully. "Their color didn't figure into it, and yet you are white. They were your people." Luke raised his eyes then, meeting the chief's gaze directly despite Mary's warning. "With respect, Chief, men who do what they were planning aren't my people. Don't matter what color they are." A dangerous murmur ran through the crowd. Several warriors stepped forward, hands on knives. But Marcus raised one hand and they stopped instantly. "You speak boldly for a man alone among enemies," the chief observed. "I'm hoping I'm not among enemies." Luke said, "I brought your people home safe. Figured that might count for something." Marcus's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. He turned to address the crowd in Apache, his voice carrying the authority of years of leadership. The response was immediate and passionate. Voices raised in argument, gestures flying. Luke caught enough words to understand the debate. Some wanted him gone immediately. Others were arguing for something else. Sarah stepped forward then, cradling her wounded arm. She spoke directly to the chief, her voice strong despite her injury. When she pulled away the bandage to show the wound, already showing signs of infection despite Luke's efforts, gasps rose from several women in the crowd. Ruth was next, her soft voice somehow carrying over the murmurs. She spoke at length, gesturing occasionally toward Luke. At one point, she touched her scarred face, and Luke saw the chief's expression soften almost imperceptibly. But it was Mary who delivered what seemed to be the decisive argument. She strode to the center of the circle, her height and bearing commanding attention. She spoke with passion and authority, and at one point she did something that made the entire crowd fall silent. She removed an ornament from around her neck, something wrapped in leather, and held it up for all to see. The chief stared at the object for a long moment, then at Mary, then finally at Luke. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different weight. "The moon rises," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "When it reaches its highest point, you will choose." Luke felt his stomach drop. "Choose? I don't understand." Marcus's smile was thin and humorless. "You saved 3 women. By our law, this creates obligation, debt, The women are widows, without protection. You will choose one as wife. Provide that protection. This satisfies the debt, honors their status, and—" his eyes glinted with something that might have been dark amusement. "On. Determines if your words about color not mattering are truth or wind." The crowd erupted again, but differently this time. Excited, anticipatory. Luke's head spun as he tried to process what was happening. "Chief Marcus, with respect, I didn't save them expecting any reward, and marriage, that's not something a man should be forced into. Or a woman, either." "No force," Marcus said calmly. "You may refuse, but then you leave immediately, and the debt remains. The women will bear the shame of obligation unfulfilled, and you—" he paused meaningfully. "You will travel at night through Apache land with no protection from our laws. Many young warriors are angry about white encroachment. Accidents happen in darkness." The threat was politely delivered, but unmistakable. Luke looked at the three women, searching for some sign of what they thought about this insane situation. Mary's face was carefully neutral. Sarah looked defiant, and Ruth wouldn't meet his eyes at all. "And if I choose?" Luke asked, his mouth dry. "Then you are bound by Apache law. The woman becomes your responsibility. You may stay in our village or leave with her. But the bond is recognized. Break it, and you answer to me personally." The chief's hand rested casually on the knife at his belt. Luke ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. This morning he'd been worried about conserving water. Now he was facing a choice that would change multiple lives forever. "Do they get a say in this?" For the first time. Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "You concern yourself with their wishes. A marriage where one person's unwilling isn't a marriage." Luke said firmly, "It's something else, something I won't be part of." The chief translated Luke's words for the crowd, and another wave of murmuring arose. Several elders leaned in to confer with Marcus, their weathered faces animated with interest. "You continue to surprise," Marcus said finally. "Very well. Each woman may refuse your choice, but choose you must, or face the consequences I have spoken." The chief gestured, and space was cleared around the fire. More wood was added until the flames leaped high, casting dancing shadows on the adobe walls. Drums appeared from somewhere, their rhythm beginning slow and steady like a heartbeat. Luke found himself seated on a log, the three women arranged across from him. The entire village seemed to press closer, creating a living wall of faces lit by firelight. Above, the moon climbed steadily, marking time toward a moment that would change everything. Joseph, the young warrior from earlier, strutted past and said something in Apache that made several others laugh harshly. Mary's face darkened, but she translated for Luke. "He says the white man will run like a rabbit when the choosing comes, that your courage is only for fighting men who cannot defend themselves properly." "Maybe he's right," Luke admitted quietly. "I'm scared as hell right now." Ruth looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time since the storm. "Fear is wisdom when facing life-changing moments," she said. "Only fools feel nothing when the spirits gather to witness." The drums continued their relentless beat. The moon rose higher, and Luke Carter, failed rancher and accidental hero, prepared to make a choice that would echo through all his remaining days. Around him, the Apache waited to see if his actions would match his words, if his courage extended beyond gunfights to matters of the heart. The fire crackled and sparked, sending embers dancing toward the stars. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, a sound that made several people touch protective amulets. The night was full of omens and possibilities, and at the center of it all sat one white man and three Apache women, bound together by violence, choice, and the inexorable movement of the moon across the desert sky. Chief Marcus stood again, his shadow long and dark across the ground. "The time grows short," he announced. "Let all witness what comes next, for good or ill." Luke felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders like a mountain. Whatever happened in the next few hours would ripple outward, changing not just his life, but the lives of others. He thought of his father's dreams, his own failed plans, and realized that perhaps the most important journeys were the ones you never intended to take. The drums beat faster now, urgent and insistent. The choosing time was almost upon them. The drums stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so complete that Luke could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Chief Marcus raised both arms, and the gathered villagers seemed to hold their collective breath. Above, the moon hung like a silver dollar against the star-studded sky, still climbing toward its apex. "The white man must understand," Marcus announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the gathering. "This is not white man's marriage. This is Apache binding, sacred, unbreakable except by death or dishonor." He fixed Luke with a penetrating stare. "Do you comprehend?" Luke's throat felt like sandpaper. "I understand, Chief Marcus, but understanding and accepting are different things. I saved these women because it was right, not to claim one like property." A ripple of surprise ran through the crowd. Several elders leaned together, whispering rapidly. Mary translated their words quietly. "They say you speak like Apache, not white. This confuses them." Chief Marcus circled the fire slowly, his injured leg barely noticeable now, as if the ceremony had given him renewed strength. "Then let me explain Apache way. These three suffered loss, great loss. In our tradition, widows must be protected, provided for. You created obligation when you saved them. This ceremony satisfies that obligation with honor, for them and you." "But they don't know me," Luke protested. "And I don't know them. Not really. 3 days on the trail doesn't make a marriage." Sarah suddenly spoke up, her injured arm held stiffly at her side. Her Apache words were sharp, angry. Mary hesitated before translating. "She says white men took her husband without knowing him. Why should knowing matter now?" The bitter truth of her words hit Luke like a physical blow. He looked at each woman in turn, trying to read their faces in the firelight. Mary stood tall and impassive, every inch the leader. Sarah's eyes burned with barely contained fury. Ruth seemed to be looking through him to something beyond. "May I speak with them?" Luke asked. "Before this goes further," Marcus considered, then nodded. "The moon climbs. You have until it reaches there." He pointed to a spot perhaps an hour from zenith. "To know what you need to know." Luke rose on unsteady legs and moved to where the women waited. The crowd pulled back slightly, giving them a small circle of privacy, though dozens of eyes remained fixed on them. "I need to understand," he said quietly. "What happens to you if I refuse? Tell me honestly." Mary and Ruth exchanged glances while Sarah stared at the ground. Finally, Mary spoke. "We continue as we are. Widows. No status, no protection beyond what the tribe can spare. In hard times," she shrugged eloquently. "That's not right," Luke said. "You're strong, capable women. You don't need a man's protection. Apache law is not white law." Ruth said softly. "We live between worlds now, old ways dying, new ways strange and hard. Widows without family, without husband, we become shadows." Luke felt the weight of responsibility settling heavier on his shoulders. "And if I choose, what happens then?" Sarah looked up sharply and spoke in broken English. "You think we want white husband? You think we forget who killed our men?" "Sarah," Mary warned, but the wounded woman continued. "My William died fighting soldiers. Ruth's man died from white sickness. Mary's James shot by mistake. White mistake." She spat the words like bullets. "Now white man thinks to own us?" "I don't want to own anyone," Luke said firmly. "That's not who I am." "Then who are you?" Ruth asked, and something in her quiet voice made the question feel larger than its simple words. Luke considered how to answer. Who was he? A failed rancher? A man running from broken dreams? Or something more? "I'm just a man trying to do right," he said finally. "Same as anyone. I got no family left, no home to speak of. Everything I built dried up and blew away, but I know wrong when I see it, and I try to stop it. That's all I can claim." The women absorbed this in silence. Around them, the crowd had begun to chant softly, a rhythmic sound that seemed to make the air itself pulse with anticipation. The moon continued its relentless climb. "I need to know something too," Luke continued, "If I choose one of you, and I'm not saying I will, but if I do, what happens to the others?" Mary's expression softened slightly. "That is good question. Shows you think beyond yourself." She gestured to her companions. "We are bonded by loss, but not bound together. Each must find her own path. The one chosen gains a protector," Ruth added. "Perhaps more. In time, the others continue as before, but with honor intact, the debt is satisfied for all." Luke studied their faces, seeing past the surface to the pain beneath. 3 women who'd loved and lost, now facing an impossible situation because he'd done what he thought was right. The irony wasn't lost on him. "What would your husbands want?" he asked suddenly. The question clearly surprised them. Sarah's anger flickered, replaced momentarily by something softer. Ruth touched her scarred face unconsciously. Mary stood straighter. If that was possible, "James would want me safe," Mary said quietly. "He was a practical man, would see sense in this, even if it hurt his pride." "William would fight," Sarah admitted. "But William gone, fighting done, only living left." Ruth was quiet longest. When she spoke, her voice was distant. "Thomas would want me to choose happiness. He always said life too short for looking backward only." She met Luke's eyes. "But happiness seems like foreign word now." Chief Marcus's voice cut through their conversation. "Time grows short. The spirits grow impatient." Luke felt panic rising in his chest. How could he make such a choice? Each woman was remarkable in her own way, each carrying wounds that might never heal. To choose one felt like abandoning the others. Yet refusing to choose would abandon them all to hardship. "I need to say something," he announced, louder than intended. To everyone. Marcus raised an eyebrow but gestured for him to continue. Luke turned to face the gathered crowd, his heart hammering. Many faces showed hostility, some curiosity, a few, mainly among the elders, something that might have been understanding. "I know I don't belong here," Luke began, his voice carrying in the still night air. "I'm white, you're Apache. History stands between us like a wall built of blood and broken promises. I can't change that, can't bring back the dead or undo the wrongs." He paused, gathering his thoughts while Mary translated for those who didn't speak English. The crowd listened intently. "But I also know what I saw 3 days ago. Men about to do evil, and women defending themselves with courage that humbled me. I acted because it was right, not because they were Apache or despite it, just because they were people in need." Joseph, the young warrior, called out something challenging. Mary translated, "He says words are easy, actions at gunpoint easier still. What about actions in peace? What about living with choice made?" Luke nodded at the young man. "Fair question. Truth is, I don't know if I can do this right. Never been married, barely know your ways. I'd likely make mistakes daily, but..." He looked at the 3 women again. "I know about working hard, about staying when things get difficult, about treating folks with respect regardless of differences. If that's enough, then maybe this could work." The crowd's murmur had a different quality now, less hostile, more contemplative. Even Joseph looked thoughtful rather than dismissive. Chief Marcus stood again. "The moon nears its peak. Choose now, or choose to leave. But choose." Luke felt time compress, the weight of the moment pressing down like a physical thing. He looked at each woman one more time, seeing not just their present selves, but imagining their futures. Mary, the natural leader, would survive regardless, her strength carrying her through, but would she ever allow herself to be vulnerable again? Sarah, fierce and wounded, her anger a shield against more pain. How long could rage sustain her? And Ruth, gentle despite her losses, carrying scars both visible and hidden. What would become of her quiet strength in a world that rewarded hardness? The answer came not from his mind, but from some deeper place, a recognition that felt like coming home after a long journey. He'd known, perhaps, since that moment in the sandstorm when she'd gripped his arm and he'd felt her trembling, not with fear, but with memories too heavy to bear alone. But before he could speak, One more thing needed saying. He turned to Chief Marcus. I want to understand. If the woman I choose refuses, what then? For the first time all evening, Marcus smiled genuinely. Then you have chosen unwisely, and must choose again, or leave. The woman's will matters in this. We are not savages, whatever your people may think. Luke nodded, relief flooding through him. At least he wouldn't be forcing anyone into something they didn't want. He took a deep breath, aware that his next words would change everything. Before I choose, he said, his voice steady now, I make this promise. Whoever accepts me will have a partner, not a master. I'll work to provide, protect as needed, but also listen and learn. This isn't about ownership. It's about building something together from the ashes of what we've all lost. The silence that followed felt sacred, as if even the desert itself waited to hear what would come next. The moon touched its zenith, bathing everything in silver light that made the ordinary world seem transformed into something mythical. Luke Carter, failed rancher and unlikely hero, prepared to speak words that would bind his fate to another's, for better or worse. The choosing time had come at last. Chief Marcus raised his hand, and the murmuring crowd fell silent. The white man will speak privately with each woman. This is proper. Let them use my dwelling. He gestured toward the largest adobe structure, its doorway covered with a beautifully woven blanket. Luke's palms were sweating as he followed the direction. Aware of every eye upon him, the three women rose as one, their movements graceful despite the tension that radiated from them like heat from sun-baked stone. Inside the chief's dwelling, the atmosphere was different, quieter, more intimate. Oil lamps cast warm light over walls decorated with painted symbols and woven hangings. The space smelled of sage, leather, and the lingering smoke of ceremonial tobacco. I'll speak with each of you alone, Luke said, his voice barely above a whisper. You deserve that much. Mary nodded approvingly. I will go first, she announced with characteristic authority. Sarah and Ruth withdrew to wait outside, alone with Mary. Luke found himself studying her face properly for the first time. She was perhaps 35, with fine lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. Her bearing reminded him of a cavalry officer he'd once known, someone used to command, to making hard decisions. You would be a fool to choose me, Mary said bluntly before he could speak. Luke blinked in surprise. Why do you say that? I am oldest. My childbearing years grow short. I have led too long to follow easily, and— She paused, seeming to wrestle with the words. My heart died with James. What I could offer you would be duty, respect perhaps, but not love. You deserve better than half a woman. Maybe you deserve better than a failed rancher with nothing but a horse and a gun. Luke countered. Mary's lips twitched. Perhaps we could be two failures together, but no. She shook her head firmly. I see how you look at Ruth when you think no one watches, and how she looks at you when she thinks the same. Luke felt heat rise in his face. I didn't realize. Men never do, Mary said with the first genuine warmth he'd heard from her. Listen, Luke Carter, I lead these women because someone must. Sarah needs her anger still. It keeps her standing. But Ruth needs what you might give. Hope, new beginning, the chance to heal. What about what you need? Mary's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a depth of pain that made Luke's chest ache. I need my James back. Since that cannot be, I need purpose. Leading our people gives me that. A marriage of convenience would not. She stood, smoothing her skirts with hands that trembled slightly. Choose wisely, white man, and know this, hurt her, and no Apache law will protect you from me. Before Luke could respond, she was gone, sending Sarah in with a gesture. Sarah entered like a storm contained in human form. Her wounded arm was held stiffly, but her eyes blazed with undiminished fire. She sat across from him, back rigid, chin raised in defiance. Do you think I want white husband? She began without preamble. You think I forget my William's blood on soldiers' hands? No, Luke said simply. I don't think you forget anything. Don't think you should, either. This seemed to surprise her. She studied him with narrowed eyes. Then why you think I would accept you? I don't, Luke admitted. Honestly, I think you'd probably knife me in my sleep within a week. Despite herself, Sarah's mouth quirked. Maybe 2 weeks. You fight well enough to earn that much time. They sat in silence for a moment. Luke could hear drums starting again outside. A different rhythm now, less urgent, more contemplative. Can I ask you something? Luke ventured. That anger you carry, does it keep you warm at night? Does it fill the empty place where William used to be? Sarah's face darkened dangerously. You know nothing of... I know about loss. Luke interrupted gently. Maybe not the same kind, but loss all the same. I know about waking up and for just a second forgetting they're gone, then having it hit you all over again. I know about anger being easier than grief because at least anger makes you feel strong. Sarah's rigid posture cracked slightly. When she spoke again, her voice was rougher. William was everything. Warrior, yes, but also gentle. He made me laugh, made me feel beautiful. Even when covered in dust from working, when they killed him. They killed that woman too. All that's left is this. She gestured at herself with her good arm. I don't believe that, Luke said. You defended yourself and your sisters against those bandits. That took more than anger. It took courage, intelligence, skill. William's widow might have died, but Sarah the warrior survived. That's someone worth knowing. Sarah stared at him for a long moment. You strange white man, not like others. I'll take that as a compliment. She rose abruptly. I would not make good wife for you. Too much hate still. Maybe someday, when the fire burns less. She shrugged. But Ruth has different fire. Banked coals, not raging flames. She could warm a home, not burn it down. At the doorway, she paused. You saved us. For that, I give you respect. Maybe in time, could give more. But not now. Now. I need my anger still. Is all I have left of him. She left, and Ruth entered so quietly, Luke almost didn't notice until she stood before him. In the lamplight, her scars were barely visible, and he was struck again by the quiet beauty that seemed to emanate from her like heat from stone. Ruth sat gracefully, folding her hands in her lap. Unlike the others, she seemed calm, though Luke noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. The others have spoken against themselves, she said softly. Told you why choosing them would be mistake. Yes, Luke agreed, though I'm not sure I believe them entirely. They spoke truth, each in her way. Mary needs no man. She has found her strength alone. Sarah needs her anger like a crutch to walk. But what of Ruth? She spoke of herself as if discussing another person entirely. What does Ruth need? Luke leaned forward. What do you need? Ruth? She was quiet so long he wondered if she'd answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I need to not be afraid anymore. Afraid of what? Of kindness, of hope, of believing something good might last. She raised her eyes to his, and the raw vulnerability there made his breath catch. When the spotted sickness came, I prayed to every spirit I knew, offered everything I had, nothing worked. Thomas died in my arms, burning with fever, not knowing me at the end. Luke fought the urge to reach for her hand. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't bring dead back. She echoed Mary's earlier words, but without bitterness. After, I wanted to follow him. Would have, but for Mary and Sarah, they lost too, needed someone who understood. So I stayed, learned to be empty instead of dead. You're not empty, Luke said firmly. I've seen you with the children in the village, the way they run to you. Empty people don't draw others like that. Children don't know better, Ruth murmured. But you are a grown man. You should know better than to see what isn't there. Maybe I see what could be there, Luke suggested, given time and patience. Ruth studied him intently. Why would you choose broken woman? Mary is strong, Sarah is fierce. What is Ruth? Luke considered his words carefully. You're the one who spotted the tracks that might have saved us from those renegades. You're the one who knew just how to help bind wounds without being asked. You're the one who made sure everyone ate before taking food yourself." He paused. "And you're the one who held on to me during that sandstorm. Not because you were scared, but because you knew I needed something to anchor me." Ruth's eyes widened slightly. "You noticed such things?" "I notice everything about you," Luke admitted, then felt heat rise in his face at the admission. A ghost of a smile touched Ruth's lips, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "You are a strange man, Luke Carter. See things others miss, but do you see truly, or only what you wish to see?" "Only one way to find out," Luke said. They sat in silence. But it was a different silence than before, charged with possibility rather than grief. Outside, the drums had stopped, and Luke could hear voices raised in what sounded like debate. "If you choose me," Ruth said suddenly, "I cannot promise love. My heart is careful now. Guards itself. I'm not asking for promises." Luke replied, "Just a chance, for both of us." Ruth stood slowly, gracefully. At the doorway, she turned back. "You saved our lives. For that alone, I would accept if chosen, but Luke—" She used his name for the first time. "I think maybe you saved more than lives. Maybe you saved hope, too. That is a harder thing to carry." She slipped out, leaving Luke alone with his swirling thoughts. Each woman had revealed depths he'd only glimpsed on the trail. Mary's strength and sacrifice. Sarah's passionate grief. Ruth's quiet courage in the face of devastating loss. How could he choose between them? But even as he asked the question, he knew the answer. Had known it, perhaps, from that moment in the storm. Ruth didn't need a savior or a master. She needed a partner in healing. Someone who understood that sometimes the bravest thing was simply to keep living when everything in you wanted to quit. Luke emerged from the chief's dwelling to find the entire village still assembled. The three women stood together near the fire, their face carefully neutral. Chief Marcus waited by the central fire, his expression unreadable. "You have spoken with each?" the chief asked. "I have." "And you have made your choice?" Luke looked at the three women, Mary with her regal bearing and hidden pain, Sarah with her fierce spirit and protective anger, Ruth with her gentle strength and carefully guarded heart. Each remarkable, each deserving of more than life had given them. "I have," Luke said, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. The moon hung directly overhead now, a perfect silver disk that seemed to pulse with otherworldly light. The moment of choice had arrived, and with it, the knowledge that words spoken now would echo through all the days to come. The tension in the air grew thick as morning fog as Luke stepped forward to speak his choice. Before he could open his mouth, a commotion erupted at the edge of the gathering. A group of young warriors, led by Joseph, pushed through the crowd, their faces painted with war colors that gleamed ominously in the firelight. "No!" Joseph shouted in English, clearly wanting Luke to understand every word. "This is wrong. This white man comes here, speaks smooth words, and we give him our women, our sisters?" He spat on the ground. "I say no." Several other young men echoed his sentiment, their hands moving to weapons. The crowd stirred uneasily, dividing between those nodding agreement and others who looked to Chief Marcus for guidance. Marcus raised his hand for silence, but Joseph wasn't finished. "My father died at Skeleton Canyon, killed by white soldiers. My brother lost at Camp Grant massacre. Now we reward white man with Apache woman?" His voice cracked with emotion. "Where is justice? Where is honor?" More warriors stepped forward, forming a loose line behind Joseph. Luke counted at least 15, all young, all burning with the kind of righteous anger that could turn deadly in a heartbeat. His hand instinctively moved toward his gun, but Mary caught his eye and shook her head minutely. "Joseph speaks truth." Another warrior, this one bearing fresh scars across his chest, stepped forward. "The white man must prove himself worthy, not just with words, but with blood." Chief Marcus's expression darkened like a gathering storm. "Samuel," he addressed the scarred warrior, using his Christian name with deliberate emphasis. "You'll forget yourself. This is council, not war party." "Then let it be both." Samuel shot back. Let the white man face trial by combat. If he survives, he can choose. If not, he smiled coldly. The question resolves itself. The crowd exploded into debate. Some elders shook their heads disapprovingly, while others seemed to consider the proposal. The three women stood frozen, their earlier composure cracking as the situation spiraled toward violence. Luke stepped into the circle of firelight, raising his voice to be heard. If that's what it takes, I accept. Sudden silence fell. Even Joseph looked surprised, having expected the white man to back down or flee. You don't know our ways of combat, Chief Marcus warned. This is not white man's duel with rules and seconds. This is until one yields or cannot continue. I understand, Luke said steadily, though his heart was hammering. But if I'm asking to join your people, even temporarily, then I should face your trials. Ruth started forward. No, this is not our way. The choosing ceremony is for Apache men. Joseph interrupted harshly. This one is white. Let him prove he has Apache heart, or let him run like the coward he is. Sarah surprised everyone by speaking up, her injured arm forgotten as she gestured angrily. Joseph Little Crow talks bravely now. Where was such courage when bandits attacked us? Where was mighty warrior then? Joseph's face flushed dark with shame and anger. I was hunting. Had I been there? Had you been there, you would be dead, Mary said flatly. This man fought 5 alone. How many have you fought, Joseph? In real combat, not warrior games. The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. Joseph's hand went to his knife, but Chief Marcus intervened with a voice like thunder. Enough! There will be order! He looked between Luke and the young warriors, his expression calculating. The challenge has been made and accepted. But, he raised a hand as Joseph started to smile. Not as you think. Combat, yes, but Apache way, to prove worth as protector and provider, not just killer. He gestured to one of the elders, who hurried away and returned with several items. A bow, a knife, a length of rope, and surprisingly, what looked like traditional farming tools. 3 trials, Marcus announced. Hunting skill, you will face Thomas in archery. Fighting skill, Samuel will test your blade work, and... His lips twitched slightly. Wisdom and patience. You will face our greatest warrior in the final test. I volunteer for the final test. Joseph stepped forward eagerly. Marcus's smile was enigmatic. No, the final test requires our most experienced warrior. He gestured to the crowd, and an ancient woman stepped forward, her back bent with age, but her eyes sharp as obsidian. Grandmother Singing Bird will administer the final trial. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Joseph looked frustrated, but even he wouldn't dare challenge the chief's decision. We begin now, Marcus declared. The moon watches, the spirits witness. Let all see whether this white man has heart strong enough for Apache woman. A circle was quickly cleared. Torches brought to supplement the firelight. Luke stripped off his jacket and hat, rolling up his sleeves. Across from him, Thomas, a lean warrior, perhaps his own age, strung a bow with practiced ease. First trial, Marcus announced. 3 arrows each. The target... He pointed to where someone was setting up a wooden frame with a deer hide stretched across it. Whoever places arrows truest wins. Luke accepted the offered bow, testing its pull. It had been years since he'd used one regularly, but his uncle had insisted he learn, saying a man never knew when ammunition might run out. Thomas went first, his form perfect as he drew and released in one fluid motion. His arrow struck dead center with a solid thunk. His second landed a finger's width from the first. The third completed a tight grouping that drew appreciative murmurs from the crowd. Luke stepped up, aware of hundreds of eyes upon him. He knocked his first arrow, drew back slowly, remembering his uncle's lessons. Don't aim, boy. Feel it. The arrow knows where it wants to go. He released, and the arrow struck the hide, not center, but solidly in the target area. His second shot was better, closer to the middle. For his third shot, Luke took a different approach. Instead of aiming for the center where Thomas's arrows clustered, he aimed for the upper portion of the target. The arrow flew true, striking exactly where he'd intended. "Why you waste shot?" someone called out. Luke turned to address Chief Marcus directly. "In hunting, the center shot drops a deer, but it ruins the most meat. The high shot, through the lungs and heart from above, kills clean and preserves the best portions for eating. I shoot not just to kill, but to provide." Marcus nodded slowly, and Luke caught what might have been approval in his eyes. First trial is draw. Both show skill. Different kinds. The second trial came immediately. Samuel stepped forward, drawing a long knife that glinted wickedly in the firelight. Someone handed Luke a similar blade, its weight unfamiliar in his hand. "First blood," Marcus announced simply. The two men circled each other warily. Samuel was clearly skilled, his movements fluid and confident. He tested Luke with quick feints, probing for weaknesses. Luke kept his stance wide and balanced, remembering bar fights and the few times he'd faced men with blades before. Samuel struck like a snake, his blade whistling through the air. Luke barely got his own knife up in time, the clash of metal ringing across the village. They pushed apart, circling again. The young warrior was faster, more skilled. But Luke had one advantage. He'd learned to fight dirty from men who fought to survive, not for honor. When Samuel committed to another lightning thrust, Luke didn't try to match his speed. Instead, he stepped inside the arc, taking a shallow cut across his ribs to get close enough to grab Samuel's wrist. They grappled, strength against strength. Samuel tried a move that would have thrown most opponents, but Luke had wrestled steers and broken horses. He set his feet and twisted, using Samuel's momentum against him. The warrior hit the ground hard, Luke following him down, knife pressed to his throat. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then Luke felt warmth spreading across his side. Samuel's blade had found its mark during the grapple. First blood. Luke rolled away and stood, one hand pressed to his ribs. The cut wasn't deep, but blood seeped between his fingers. Samuel rose too, looking surprised and perhaps a touch respectful. "Second trial to Samuel," Marcus announced. "One victory each. The third trial decides all." Grandmother Singing Bird shuffled forward, carrying something in her gnarled hands. As she came into the firelight, Luke saw it was a traditional Apache burden basket, the kind used for gathering. "Final trial," she said in a voice like wind through dry leaves. "We go to garden. You help this old woman work until moon sets, or you give up. Simple." Luke heard Joseph mutter something about foolish games, but the elders were nodding approvingly. This was a test, but not the kind Luke had expected. He followed Singing Bird to a cleared area at the edge of the village where neat rows of corn, beans, and squash grew. The old woman handed him a tool, a simple hoe, and pointed to a section of earth that needed turning. "We work," she said simply, and began pulling weeds with surprising efficiency. Luke set to work, turning the soil carefully to avoid damaging the plants. His ribs burned where Samuel had cut him, and sweat soon soaked through his shirt despite the cool night air. Singing Bird worked beside him, humming tunelessly. After perhaps 30 minutes, she spoke without looking up. "You know why this is warrior test?" Luke paused to wipe sweat from his brow. "Because providing for a family is harder than fighting." She cackled. "Smart for a white man, but only part true. Watch." She moved to another row, her movements deliberate. "See how beans climb corn, how squash leaves shade ground, keep moisture? Each helps other, alone, they struggle, together, strong." Understanding dawned. "Like marriage, like life," she corrected. "Apache know this. White men want to stand alone, be strong alone, always fail eventually. You saved 3 women. Why?" Luke considered as he worked. Because it was right. Because they needed help. And if you needed help, would you ask? The question hit unexpectedly deep. Luke thought of all the times he'd struggled alone, too proud to admit he was failing. "Probably not," he admitted. "Then you fail as husband," Singing Bird said bluntly. "Ruth needs man who can give help. Yes, but also must take help. She has much to give, wisdom, strength, healing heart. But wounded people sometimes give everything. Keep nothing for self. You understand? Luke's hand stilled on the hoe. He thought of Ruth's quiet strength, the way she'd tended others while her own pain remained locked away. I think so. Think is not enough. Must know. Singing Bird straightened, studying him with those ancient eyes. You choose her. You take sacred trust, not just to protect, but to help her remember she deserves protection too. Not just to provide, but to let her provide in return. You strong enough to be weak sometimes. The question hung in the air like smoke. Around them, the garden rustled with night breezes, and Luke could hear the crowd back at the fire growing restless. The moon was visibly lower now, perhaps an hour from setting. I don't know, Luke said honestly, but I'm willing to learn. Singing Bird studied him for a long moment, then smiled, an expression that transformed her weathered face. Good answer. Man who knows everything learns nothing. She handed him her basket. We go back now. You pass. But we haven't finished. Garden never finished, she said wisely. Always more work, but you work steady, not complain. Listen to old woman's words. Most warriors fail because they think test is about endurance. Real test is about humility. As they walked back to the fire circle, Luke saw the crowd had grown. Word had spread about the trials, and it seemed the entire village had gathered to witness the conclusion. Chief Marcus stood as they approached. The trials are complete. Thomas proved equal in skill. Samuel drew first blood, but grandmother says the white man passed her test. He looked at Singing Bird for confirmation. The old woman spoke in rapid Apache, gesturing animatedly. Whatever she said caused a stir in the crowd. Even Joseph looked thoughtful rather than angry. Marcus translated. She says he has hands that know work and ears that know how to listen. She says he might make adequate husband, with much teaching. His lips quirked. High praise from grandmother. Then we continue with choosing? Mary asked, speaking for the first time since the trials began. Wait. Joseph stepped forward again. But this time his manner was different, less aggressive, more formal. I wish to speak. Marcus nodded permission. Joseph faced Luke directly. You fought with honor, worked without complaint. Perhaps I judged too quickly. He struggled with the words. But understand, every white face reminds us of loss. Every day, more land taken, more promises broken. How can we trust? Luke met the young man's gaze steadily. You can't, he said simply. Trust is earned, not given. All I can do is try to earn it, one day at a time. And if I fail, if I prove false, he glanced at the three women. I figure you'll know what to do about it. A ripple of dark laughter ran through the warriors. Even Joseph's mouth twitched toward a smile. Then I withdraw challenge, Joseph announced formally. Let the choosing continue. But know this, white man, we watch, always. Fair enough, Luke agreed. The crowd settled back into expectant silence. The trials had changed something. Not acceptance exactly, but a willingness to see what would happen. The hostility had cooled to watchful wariness. Chief Marcus raised his arms. The moon grows low. The time of choosing cannot wait longer. He looked at Luke, who stood bloodied but unbowed in the firelight. You have proven yourself worthy to choose. Now speak your choice, and let the woman speak hers in return. Luke felt the weight of the moment settle over him like a blanket. Everything had led to this. The rescue, the journey, the trials. Now came the hardest part, speaking words that would change lives forever. He looked at the three women standing together, their faces illuminated by dancing flames. Each had touched his heart in different ways, but only one had reached past his defenses to find the lonely man beneath, just as he hoped to reach past hers to find the woman still capable of hope. The choice was clear. Now he just had to find the courage to voice it. The moon hung low on the horizon now, a pale sentinel marking time's passage as Luke stood before the assembled village. The firelight cast dancing shadows across hundreds of expectant faces, but he saw only three. Blood from Samuel's knife still seeped slowly through his shirt, each breath a reminder of the trials just past. Luke stepped forward into the circle's center, his boots scuffing against the packed earth. The drums had fallen silent, and even the desert wind seemed to hold its breath. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly in the stillness. "Before I speak my choice, I need to say something." He turned slowly, addressing the entire gathering. "I came to this place by accident, brought by chance and violence, but standing here now, maybe nothing's really chance. Maybe we all get led where we need to be, even when the path makes no sense at the time." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I lost everything to drought. My cattle, my land, my dreams. Thought I had nothing left to offer anyone, but these 3 women showed me something. Loss doesn't empty a person. It changes them, shapes them like fire shapes iron. What matters is what you do with that shaping." Luke turned to face the women directly. "Mary, you took your grief and forged it into leadership, into strength others can lean on. Sarah, you turned yours into fierce protection for those you care about. And Ruth," his voice softened, "you transformed yours into quiet compassion, into hands that heal even while your own heart bleeds." The crowd listened intently as Mary translated for those who didn't speak English. Luke saw several elders nodding approval at his words. "But I'm not choosing based on grief or loss." Luke continued, "I'm choosing based on hope, on the possibility that 2 broken people might build something whole together." He took a deep breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I choose Ruth." A ripple ran through the crowd. Surprise from some, knowing looks from others. Ruth stood frozen, her scarred face unreadable in the shifting light. Mary placed a supportive hand on her shoulder while Sarah watched with fierce protectiveness. Chief Marcus stepped forward. "The choice is made. Now the woman must speak. Ruth of the Still Waters, do you accept this man's offer? Will you bind your life to his under Apache law?" Ruth moved forward slowly, each step deliberate. She stopped just outside arm's reach of Luke, her dark eyes searching his face. The silence stretched so long that people began to shift restlessly. Finally, she spoke, her voice clear despite its quietness. "When the spotted sickness came, I prayed to every spirit I knew. I offered everything, my hair, my blood, my most precious possessions. Nothing saved my Thomas. When he died, I thought the spirits had abandoned me, or worse, that I had somehow failed them." She paused, touching her scarred face unconsciously. "I decided then that I would never ask the spirits for anything again, never hope, never pray, never believe in anything beyond each day's survival. It was easier than risking disappointment again." Luke wanted to speak, to reach out, but he sensed this moment belonged to her alone. "Then you appeared," Ruth continued, "like something from a vision quest. A white man who fought for Apache women, who showed respect instead of contempt, who saw beyond surface things." Her voice grew stronger. "Mary says you saved our lives, but I think maybe you saved something more. You reminded me that good can still exist, even in unlikely forms." She stepped closer, close enough that Luke could see the tears gathering in her eyes. "I accept your choice, Luke Carter. Not because law demands it or because I need protection. I accept because," she struggled with the words, "because you make me want to hope again. And that terrifies me more than all the bandits in the territory." Chief Marcus nodded solemnly. "It is witnessed. The binding will be—" "Wait," Luke interrupted, causing a stir. "With respect, Chief, there's something else needs saying." He looked at Sarah and Mary. "I've made my choice, but these 2 women deserve to know they're not somehow diminished by it. They're not rejected or found lacking. Any man would be honored to stand with either of them." He addressed Sarah directly. "Your anger isn't weakness, it's strength still finding its proper channel. When you're ready to let it transform into something else, you'll be a force nature itself would envy." Sarah's fierce expression cracked slightly, revealing vulnerability beneath. She nodded once, sharply, but Luke caught the glisten of tears she'd never admit to. "And Mary," he continued, "you say your heart died with James, but I don't believe it. I've seen you with the children, the way you guide your people. That takes heart, even if it's wrapped in armor now. Someday, when you're ready, Someone will see past that armor to the woman beneath, and he'll be the luckiest man alive. Mary stood straighter, if possible, and when she spoke, her voice was thick. You speak well for a white rancher. Perhaps Ruth chooses wisely after all. You do. Chief Marcus raised his staff, bringing attention back to the ceremony. The moon sets soon. We must complete the binding while night spirits witness. He gestured to several women, who hurried away and returned with items Luke couldn't quite make out in the dim light. Kneel, Marcus commanded. Both of you, face each other. Luke lowered himself carefully, his wounded side protesting. Ruth knelt gracefully across from him, their knees almost touching. This close, he could see every detail of her face, the faint scars that marked her survival, the laugh lines that suggested happier times, the determined set of her jaw. Marcus began to speak in Apache, his voice taking on a rhythmic, hypnotic quality. Mary translated quietly for Luke's benefit. He calls on the spirits of the four directions to witness. He asks the earth to support your union, the sky to shelter it, the wind to bring it freshness, the fire to keep it warm. An elderly woman Luke hadn't noticed before stepped forward with a length of soft deerskin cord. With practiced movements, she wound it around Luke's right wrist, then Ruth's left, binding them together. The cord was decorated with beads and small feathers that rustled softly with each movement. This binding represents your lives joining, Mary translated as Marcus continued. Separate threads becoming one cord, stronger together than apart. Do you understand this symbol? I understand, Luke said. I understand. Ruth echoed. Marcus produced a knife, not a weapon, but a ceremonial blade with a handle carved from antler. He held it over their bound hands. Blood seals what words begin. Do you accept this? Luke nodded. He'd expected something like this. Apache ceremonies often involved blood to show the seriousness of oaths taken. Ruth nodded as well, though Luke felt her hand tremble slightly. The chief made 2 quick, shallow cuts, one on Luke's palm, one on Ruth's. As their blood mingled, he spoke words that needed no translation. Some truths transcended language. Now speak your own words, Marcus commanded. Not Apache words or white words, your words. What do you promise each other? Luke looked into Ruth's eyes, forgetting the crowd, the pain in his side. Everything but this moment. I promise to be your shelter when storms come, your warmth when winter bites, your cool shade in summer's heat. I promise to listen more than I speak, to learn your ways and teach you mine. I promise that your sorrows will be my sorrows, your joys my joys. I promise to never ask you to be less than you are, and to always strive to be worthy of what you're giving me tonight. Ruth's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. When she spoke, her voice was steady despite the emotion behind it. I promise to stand beside you, not behind you, to speak truth even when silence would be easier, to trust you with my fears and share with you my strengths. I promise to honor who you were before this night while helping you become who you're meant to be. I promise to try, her voice cracked slightly, to try to open my heart again, even though it terrifies me, to let hope grow where only sorrow has lived. Marcus nodded approval. Good words, true words. He unwound the binding cord but didn't separate their hands. In Apache tradition, marriage is not just between 2 people but between families, clans. You have no clan here. Luke Carter, this is problem. Luke's heart sank. After everything, would some technicality undo it all? But, Marcus continued with what might have been a smile, unusual problems require unusual solutions. He looked at Mary and Sarah. Will you stand as his family in this? Luke turned to them. Surprised, Sarah looked at Mary. Some silent communication passing between them. Then both women stepped forward. He's saved us, Mary said simply. By Apache law, this creates kinship of sorts. We stand as his sisters in this, even if he is stupid white man, Sarah added. But there was warmth beneath the words. The crowd murmured, surprise, discussion. But Luke heard acceptance too. Chief Marcus raised his hands for silence. Then it is complete, Ruth of the Still Waters and Luke Carter are bound by Apache law. What spirits have witnessed, let no human undo." He paused, then added with definite amusement, "You may stop holding hands now. The blood has sealed what needed sealing." Luke looked down, realizing he was still gripping Ruth's hand tightly. They separated self-consciously, both wiping bloody palms on their clothing. "Now," Marcus announced, "we feast. A wedding without celebration is bad luck for all." The formal atmosphere shattered as the village erupted into motion. Women hurried to bring food that had apparently been prepared in anticipation. Men brought out instruments, drums, flutes, and rattles. Children who should have been asleep hours ago ran between adults' legs, excited by the break in routine. Luke found himself swept into a whirlwind of activity. Women he'd never met pressed food into his hands. Fry bread, venison stew, corn cakes sweetened with piñon nuts. Men clapped him on the back, some still wary but willing to extend provisional acceptance. Joseph even brought him a cup of something that burned like fire going down and made his eyes water. "Apache beer," Joseph said with a grin that was almost friendly. "Make you strong for wedding night." He laughed at Luke's coughing and moved on. Through it all, Luke kept finding his eyes drawn to Ruth. She was surrounded by women, all talking at once, their hands flying in animated gestures. Someone had placed a crown of desert flowers on her head, and her face, for the first time since he'd met her, showed something approaching joy. When their eyes met across the crowd, she smiled, and Luke felt something in his chest loosen that he hadn't realized was tight. As the celebration continued, Luke found himself sitting with several older men who peppered him with questions about ranching, about his plans, about how he intended to provide for Ruth. Their concerns were practical, protective, the same questions fathers and uncles would ask anywhere. "You have no cattle," one observed. "No land. How will you live?" "I've got 2 hands and a strong back," Luke replied. "I can work, ranching, hunting, whatever's needed. Ruth and I will figure it out together." "Together," another man repeated thoughtfully. "This is good word. Many white men say, 'I will provide.' Like woman is child. You say together. Maybe you not so stupid after all." Near dawn, as the celebration finally wound down, Luke found himself alone with Ruth for the first time since the ceremony. They stood at the edge of the village, watching the eastern sky lighten with approaching day. "Are you angry?" Luke asked quietly. "About being pushed into this?" Ruth considered before answering. "I thought I would be when Mary first told us what the chief planned. I was furious. Another choice taken away. Another man deciding my fate." She turned to face him. "But then you asked to speak with us. You listened. You gave us voices in this choice. That changed everything." "I meant what I said in there," Luke said. "Every word." "I know." Ruth touched the cut on her palm, already beginning to heal. "That's what frightens me. It's easier to guard against cruelty than kindness." "Then we'll go slow," Luke promised. "Day by day, like building a house. Strong foundation first." Ruth smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. "You sound like Thomas. He always said—" She stopped, pain flickering across her features. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't—" "Don't," Luke interrupted gently. "Don't apologize for loving him. That love is part of who you are. I'm not trying to replace him. Ruth, couldn't if I tried. I'm just hoping maybe there's room in your life for something new alongside the memories." Ruth studied him wonderingly. How does a white rancher learn such wisdom? From losing everything. Luke said simply, "Teaches you what really matters." As the first rays of sun painted the mountains gold and crimson, they stood together watching the world wake. Behind them, the village stirred to life. Cook fires starting, children's voices rising, the eternal rhythm of community continuing. Luke thought about the strange path that had brought him here, from failed rancher to unlikely protector to, now, husband in an Apache village. Nothing like the life he'd planned, but perhaps exactly the life he needed. "What happens now?" he asked. Ruth slipped her hand into his, carefully, tentatively. but deliberately. "Now we begin," she said, one sunrise at a time. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and new possibilities. Somewhere in the village, a baby laughed, and life moved forward as it always had, weaving new threads into the eternal pattern of human hope and resilience. Luke squeezed Ruth's hand gently, feeling the rough calluses that spoke of work and survival, the warmth that promised perhaps, eventually, something more than mere survival. Together they turned back toward the village, toward their new life, toward whatever challenges and blessings the coming days would bring. The choosing was done. The living, the real work, was about to begin. 3 months had passed since the choosing ceremony, and the high desert sang with spring's arrival. Purple sage bloomed across the valley, and the seasonal creek ran clear with snowmelt from the distant mountains. Luke stood before the small adobe dwelling he'd built with help from the village men, watching the sunrise paint the world in shades of gold and rose. Behind him, he heard Ruth's quiet movements as she prepared the morning meal. They'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm, not yet the easy intimacy of long-married couples, but no longer the careful distance of strangers. Each day brought small victories, a shared laugh, a touch that lingered, a moment when the walls around Ruth's heart cracked just a little wider. "Your side still troubles you," Ruth observed, appearing beside him with a cup of pine needle tea. She'd noticed him favoring his left. The knife wound from Samuel had healed poorly at first, leaving a scar that pulled when the weather changed. "It's nothing," Luke said automatically, then caught himself. He'd promised honesty. "Aches some in the morning, probably always will." Ruth nodded, appreciating the correction. "I have salve that helps. Grandmother Singing Bird taught me to make it." She paused, then added quietly, "Thomas used to need it after his hunting injuries." It no longer pained Luke to hear her speak of her first husband. These memories were part of her, and he'd learned to see them as bridges to understanding rather than walls between them. The village had gradually accepted their union, though Luke knew he remained an outsider in many ways. He'd thrown himself into learning Apache language, customs, skills. His hands bore new calluses from working traditional tools. His skin darkened from long days helping with communal hunts and building projects. When Chief Marcus had declared him almost adequate last week, Luke had taken it as high praise. Mary approached from the main village, her stride purposeful as always. She'd emerged as an even stronger leader in recent months, organizing the Women's Council and negotiating with government agents who came sniffing around their borders. Sarah walked beside her, and Luke was pleased to see some of the rigid anger had left her posture. She'd begun teaching the young girls traditional weaving, channeling her fierce energy into preserving their culture. "Brother," Mary greeted Luke with the title she'd adopted since standing as his family at the wedding. "The chief calls council. There's news from Fort Stanton." Luke's stomach tightened. News from the fort rarely brought anything good. "What kind of news?" "Soldiers come," Sarah said bluntly. "Looking for renegades who raided settlement last week. They say harboring fugitives means punishment for whole village." Ruth's hand found Luke's arm. "We harbor no one. Our young men have stayed peaceful." "Try telling soldiers that." Sarah spat. "They see Apache. They see guilty." Within the hour, the entire village had gathered in the central plaza. Chief Marcus stood tall despite his years, but Luke could see the weariness in his eyes. How many times had he faced such accusations, such threats? "My people," Marcus began. "The white soldiers seek those who attacked the Murphy Ranch. They believe these men hide among us." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I have sent word that we know nothing of these raiders, but they do not believe. They come tomorrow with many guns." Angry voices rose immediately. Joseph and the younger warriors spoke of fighting, of teaching the soldiers that Apache land wasn't to be violated. Older voices counseled patience, diplomacy. The debate raged as the sun climbed higher. Luke found himself studying the faces around him, people who'd become family in ways he'd never expected. Children who called him uncle, elders who'd shared their wisdom, young couples who'd accepted him at their own wedding ceremonies, The thought of soldiers descending on this peaceful village, bringing violence and accusations, made his blood burn. "I could go to them," Luke said suddenly, his voice cutting through the debate. "I'm white. They might listen to me." Silence fell. Chief Marcus studied him with those penetrating eyes. "You would speak for us?" "I'd speak the truth," Luke said firmly. "This village has done nothing wrong. The people here work hard, keep the peace, try to build something lasting. If the soldiers want to find raiders, they should look elsewhere." "They'll call you a traitor," Mary warned. "White man who stands with Apache becomes enemy to both." Luke looked at Ruth, saw the fear and pride warring in her eyes. "I made my choice 3 months ago. I'll stand by it." The debate continued, but eventually it was decided. Luke would ride to meet the soldiers, accompanied by Chief Marcus and several respected elders. They'd try diplomacy first, force only if left no choice. That night, as they prepared for bed in their small home, Ruth was unusually quiet. Luke could feel the weight of unspoken words between them. "Say it," he encouraged gently. Ruth turned from the window where she'd been watching stars. "When you go tomorrow, you might not return. Soldiers have shot peace messengers before. I'll be careful. Careful doesn't stop bullets." She moved closer, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I've lost one husband to violence between our peoples. I cannot—" Her voice broke. "I cannot do it again. Luke, it would break what's left of me." Luke pulled her into his arms, feeling her tremble against him. It was the most vulnerable she'd been since their wedding, and he held her like she was made of spun glass. "I'm coming back," he promised. "We've got too much building left to do. That garden won't plant itself, and you still haven't taught me to weave a proper basket." She laughed wetly against his chest. "Your baskets are terrible, like a child made them. See, can't leave you with such poor craftsmanship as my legacy." They stood holding each other as the candle burned low. Finally, Ruth pulled back enough to look up at him. "Luke Carter, you impossible man, you made me hope again. Do not make me regret it." "Never," he swore, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted of tears and promises. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Luke dressed carefully in his best shirt, a gift from the village women, and strapped on his gun. He hadn't worn it in weeks, and the weight felt foreign now. The delegation assembled at the village edge. Chief Marcus wore his finest ceremonial dress, a visible reminder of his status and dignity. The elders carried staffs of office and wore their medals from past government negotiations, proof of their peaceful intentions. Ruth stood with Mary and Sarah to see them off. As Luke mounted Buttercup, Ruth stepped forward and tied something around his wrist, a braided cord decorated with blue beads. "For protection," she said simply. "And so you remember what waits for you here." The journey to the meeting point took 2 hours. They found the soldiers already waiting, a full company, armed and nervous. Luke recognized the captain from his ranching days, a fair man named Morrison who'd always dealt honestly with locals. "Captain," Luke called out, riding slightly ahead. "Luke Carter. We met a few years back at Fort Stanton." Morrison's eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed as he took in Luke's Apache companions. "Carter, what in blazes are you doing with these people?" "Living with them," Luke said simply. "Married into the tribe 3 months ago. These are good people, Captain. Whatever you're looking for, it's not in their village." The captain studied him like he'd grown a second head. "You've gone native?" "I've gone where life led me," Luke corrected. "Now, how about we talk this through before anyone does something stupid?" The negotiations took hours. Chief Marcus spoke with dignity and patience, explaining how his people had kept every treaty requirement, how they'd turned away the very renegades the soldiers sought. Luke translated and vouched, using his white face as a bridge between worlds. Finally, as the sun reached its peak, Captain Morrison nodded slowly. "I'll need to inspect the village, verify what you're telling me." "With respect," Luke said carefully. "How many soldiers?" "Myself and 2 men, unarmed except for sidearms." Luke looked at Chief Marcus, who considered before nodding. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than a full military invasion. The inspection went smoothly. The village presented its best face: children playing, women working, men tending fields. No sign of raiders or stolen goods. Captain Morrison seemed particularly surprised by the obvious peace and prosperity. As they prepared to leave, the captain pulled Luke aside. "You've really thrown in with them. I found something here I never had before." Luke said honestly, "A real home, family, purpose beyond just surviving." Morrison shook his head. "You're either the smartest man I've met or the craziest. Maybe both." He mounted his horse. "I'll report that this village is peaceful, harboring no fugitives. But Carter, be careful. Not everyone will be as willing to listen as I was." After the soldiers left, the village erupted in celebration. Luke found himself hoisted on young warriors' shoulders. Joseph leading the cheering. The crisis had passed, and Luke's intervention had proved crucial. That night, another feast was held, but this time, Luke wasn't the uncertain outsider. He sat with Ruth beside him, truly part of the community. Children climbed on his lap for stories. Elders shared private jokes. And when the dancing began, Ruth led him into the circle without hesitation. As they danced under stars that seemed especially bright, Ruth whispered, "You came back. Always." Luke promised, later. As the celebration wound down, they stood once again at their favorite spot overlooking the valley. The night wind carried sage and wood smoke, the eternal sense of home. "We did something good today," Ruth said softly. "Showed that peace is possible, that understanding can bridge differences." Luke wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close, one day at a time, like we promised. In the distance, coyotes sang their ancient songs. The village settled into peaceful sleep behind them, and on the eastern horizon, the faintest hint of dawn promised another day of possibilities. Luke thought of the man he'd been, bitter, broken, directionless. That man had died somewhere on the trail between saving 3 women and choosing one to build a life with. In his place stood someone new, someone who understood that sometimes losing everything was just preparation for finding what really mattered. The Penniless rancher had rescued 3 tall Apache widows. Their chief had demanded he choose by midnight. In choosing, Luke had found not just a wife, but a whole new existence. And in being chosen, he'd discovered that the greatest adventures weren't always about riding into the sunset alone. Sometimes they were about finding where you belonged and having the courage to stay. As dawn broke fully, painting the desert in colors that no artist could capture, Luke and Ruth walked hand in hand back to their home. Behind them, the village stirred to life. Before them, the future stretched out like an unwritten story, full of challenges and possibilities in equal measure. But they would face it together, one sunrise at a time, building something beautiful from the ashes of their losses. And that, Luke thought as Ruth smiled up at him in the morning light, was the greatest treasure any man could find. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. We'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale from, whether you're driving through the countryside, relaxing at home, or perhaps even somewhere in the American Southwest where our story took place. Please subscribe to our channel From Wild West and share your thoughts about Luke and Ruth's journey in the comments below. Did their story touch your heart? What part resonated with you most? Let's keep the spirit of these frontier tales alive together.